Technology and, dare I say, artificial intelligence in government. We're talking about that today on Builders Live. Hey, I'm Chris Wink. I'm the co-founder, CEO, and publisher of Technically, the news organization with a community of technologists and entrepreneurs. We have, for nearly 20 years at Technically, covered innovation inside and outside government. I warn you that we will be talking about artificial intelligence, but not just that today. Civic technology, uses of technology in and outside of government for resident uses. And to do that, I am pleased to be joined by Dave Cole. Since 2024, he has been the state of New Jersey's chief innovation officer. He is a member of the governor's cabinet. Spent time at an AI startup, digital consultancy at 18F, served in the Obama administration. Dave, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Absolutely. All right. So let me start with a couple cheap shots. Dave Cole, in the moment we're in, the narrative would be, doesn't everyone want to be at an AI startup? Why the heck did you go back to government? You were in federal government. You went to the private sector, came back to state. Why, as I believe a New Jersey native, are you serving the good people of New Jersey in government again? Why has that made sense for you as a career move?
I think being a New Jersey native has a lot to do with it. I grew up in this state. I care about how government works generally. I've seen what good government can do to help people and what not so great government could do to create friction and challenges that stop people from getting the help that they need at the time when they need it most. For me, it's always about just wanting to be working on the problems that are going to have the most impact. I think a lot of folks are attracted to technology because of the scale. We can do things on unprecedented levels with technology, but there's an opportunity to do that too in public service, where the programs we're working on affect hundreds of thousands or millions of people, and the benefits and the outcomes of those. It's more than just creating companies and cool new applications for technology. It's helping people find a job, get food, stay healthy, be able to get back on their feet after a setback. So for me, it's a very different kind of reward structure and incentives, but there's nothing quite like launching something in this environment, seeing the impact and getting to build on top of that.
I associate you with what we now call civic technology, that in some sense technically very much got our start covering these inside outside, people who I remember a time felt apolitical to me, that we were interested in technical solutions to solve resident problems. They were often very modest, very specific. I can remember hosting tons of hackathons in the early 2010s where the focus was like, let's just solve this intervention. Technology is a small tool to solve a small problem. And that is what we became to know civic technology. It's been a weird couple of years now, and we technically have done a couple reporting on how both federal government conversations, DOGE and the like, has kind of like muddy the waters of what we mean by technology in government. What do we mean by a more efficient and effective government? So I guess, can you give me your window into civic tech of the moment? Should people be wary of taking jobs in government to build with technology? Are we still on the path that civic technology promised a decade ago?
I think the path it's evolved. It's matured in many ways too. I can remember when I first got involved in this work, we were a part of a communications team. Our job was to help spread the governor, or at the point the president's message was working on a website, whitehouse.gov. We didn't have a Twitter profile, a Facebook profile, anything else. All that had to get set up as new infrastructure. And so that's 2008, 2009. You think about how much has changed since then. And you have whole organizations that are dedicated to bringing people from the private sector, from academia, to apply these kinds of skill sets to the challenges that we have in government. So I think by and large, it's a good thing. Obviously, there have been a lot of things in the last year that have disrupted the field. A lot of folks who came to government service because they wanted to do this kind of work, and they weren't thinking about it as a political opportunity. They were thinking about it as a service opportunity, got laid off, and whole teams were disbanded. I think, if anything, the focus now has shifted to the states over the last year. I feel very fortunate to have been working and building up our operation in New Jersey for a couple of years now, but we benefit from all the folks out there who are interested in doing this work, who are looking for a place to land. And the states are the front lines. We deal with people every single day who use government programs, who benefit from them. We hear from them when they're not working very clearly as well. And so this is where the action is at this point. And I think, there's still a ton to cover. The last thing I'd say on this too, it's not just that the civic tech kind of disruptions are happening in a vacuum. Think about what artificial intelligence means for all of us and all of our kind of work, the ability to do so much more, and then what that can mean for displacement. There's disruption going on everywhere. I really think, the world hasn't and probably never will be the same coming out of the pandemic, and we're all sort of reconciling with different changes amongst that. But that only reinforces the point about how important government service is, and that we need a functioning, effective government to help us at a time like this.
I want to linger on that for a sec before I push forward. One maybe hobby theory I'm trying to decide if it's just my personal experience or you touched on it yourself. That Obama administration era grew up around what we now call civic technology, this idea of leveraging technology tools and a new generation of platforms to increase the responsiveness or whatever for residents. In that then late 2000s and early 2010s period, I associate in my head very much of there was a federal government conversation and a lot of city and state activity. There's really a lot of city activity. I now do feel like I see states taking the lead. Do you feel that? You obviously represent it, but is that a fair characterization that we are entering a period where, for lots of political reasons and cultural reasons, states are leading in the civic technology and innovation game?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we saw, as you said, a lot of very interesting work happening in the cities, in New York City, even through Bloomberg Philanthropies. They pushed out a lot of investment in helping cities build capacity. We learned from that too. Just to kind of connect the dots here, one of the first projects that our team in New Jersey worked on, even before I joined, was business.nj.gov. It's still a platform that exists, serves people across the state in registering businesses. But we started by building an open source code that I believe was originally written for Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles, in collaboration also with folks in San Francisco. So the history is so rich that you can kind of pull a lot of these ideas forward, refine them, and hopefully contribute them back as well.
Yeah, the building on the open source technology, that was the dream, right? Was that can't we stack up in the public sector like we've seen in the private sector? So let's linger on that for a sec. How do you think about building technology in-house? There's a long-standing conversation of relation between private sector and public sector. We'll get to that later. Whenever we back ourselves technically into covering this, procurement comes up. How are we supposed to work with the private sector? Or others say, how do we build it in-house? Maybe just give me your sense of, where are we in the world? How do you think of your team, your stack of building in-house, building the team and the capacity to do this in-house? When do you go to the private sector? Talk to me a bit about how you think of that and if it's changing.
Yeah, this may be a controversial take. I sort of reject the premise of build versus buy and always have. There's really never one. In limited circumstances, you end up finding something that is exactly what you need, and you're going to buy it and deploy it, and maybe like an office kind of application, something like that. But when it comes to government programs and the systems that enable those programs to work, the most important thing is that they deliver benefits, that they are measurable, we can make sure that they're accountable, and that they're working to serve their programmatic goals. That usually requires customization, integration, bringing together multiple vendors. At the same time, there's really nothing that we would do as a team that we do in isolation. It's always with partners. We have partners with teams that are very flexible, agile, human-centered design and development shops that we work with. We use a lot of software as a service platforms and lower level infrastructure as platform services as well. So I think building and investing capacity within a state or within a government helps you make the right decisions about the configuration that you need. And if there is really truly a solution that's going to be pretty close to off the shelf, we run towards it because it saves our precious resources for things that are more bespoke and more complicated. So I think, I would argue we've had very strong relations with folks in the technology vendor space. I've been able to partner with many of them. I've done a little bit of that work very early on before the company that I was at focused on building a platform. We did consulting services for international development organizations and a little bit with the federal government. So, I've been on the other end of the table. I understand what it takes to be successful there. But everybody's going to reckon with the same thing, which is that the barrier to develop software has dropped so low that it's going to fundamentally change the economic model around this kind of work too.
So love that. Let's dig in there. Us poking around examples, talking to your team, permit drafter tool. Let's use that as a little bit of a case study. Your team tells me that the idea is we get some AI language drafted, but humans edit. And I think everyone's wrestling with this tension of where can we create some efficiencies, but still require real human intervention. Let's use this as a case study. Who built the thing? How do we get there? What were the rules? Just walk me through that as a kind of case study that represents when we're using AI and how.
For years, we've run business.nj.gov, and the purpose of that site is to give people all the information they need in one place to be able to operate a business in New Jersey. In doing that, we've actually generated what we estimate to be about $160, $170 million of economic activity by businesses getting started sooner. And the way they get started sooner is they have this information, right? Plain language guides on if you want to, become a hairdresser, hairstylist, these are the licenses that you will need, professional licenses. Depending on where you're located, these are the building permits or construction permits you might need. We put all of that in one place. It's organized through starter kits. There are about 60 starter kits of types of businesses, broken down into licenses and permits, over 300 on the site. But there are thousands in the state, right? So 300, we go after the ones that we think are most used by business creators and owners, but they're not necessarily, the long tail of all the permits out there. And to get a new permit onto the platform is a pretty manual process. It requires plain language content expertise. It requires some policy knowledge, and it can take somebody, 8 hours just to find the information that's out there on websites, put it together into a simplified plain language version that fits within our site. So folks on our team set up a side project, and they basically worked with an LLM and a series of prompts in a chain to do some of the initial scanning, get the data in one place, and then put together a draft, have additional prompts that check the draft, that refine it, and really go through an approximation of that manual process. It saves us about 30% time, which it's a couple hours on each permit. So that's just a start, right? But it enables us to cover more permits. And for us in our team at this point, I think the real mission is scaling. We've had a lot of good proofs of concept and some very deep dives on specific programs, but we want to be able to be everywhere across the state trying to solve the kinds of problems that exist. And we can only do that if we have efficiencies like this that balance human intelligence, human review with automation and the ability to scale the work.
What was the model shopping like? What I can imagine the dynamic is different inside government, what you guys have to do, what you're thinking about. You're still probably early on and even the vanguard of even doing the model shopping of an LLM for a tool like this. What was that process like?
Yeah, we use the models, first of all, that we can ensure have the right data privacy protections in place, that have the right terms and conditions around what's would be used, in this case, nothing being used for training. So there is a large part of work that you have to do to review the options that you have. We partner with the state's Office of Information Technology. They run a series of commercial cloud systems that we have access to. And so we've been able to look at models in Azure, specifically the OpenAI GPT models, as well as through AWS, the models that are available on Bedrock, of which we're mostly using Anthropic Claude-based models. So we do compare and contrast to see which ones are best for which use cases. And then when we build an application, it's usually a web front end tied to an API to one of those models. So we're starting with known, trusted models available under state contract because the data security is paramount for us. But then we do have some flexibility within that subset as well.
You mentioned you're in that Obama era that was deciding, hey, can we be on social platforms? What are security risks? What are responsibilities? How does government act and operate in this new environment? And maybe it's a stretch, but I also, hearing you talk about model shopping makes me think also of there were generations of what kind of devices are we okay with government, BlackBerry, iPhone, is it secure or not? Like, I can remember we reporting some on these generations of what kind of questions are supposed to be baked in. So you've been through some generations of first establishing what is the process, what is normal, what do we got to do, what's different for government. Are you bringing any of those lessons into this generation of picking out, LLM models? Did you have any like deja vu of, oh, this reminds me of a very different era, or like did you inject any of the intelligence from the past and did it inform what you think we need in the future to let government use tools in a way that fits with government's responsibilities?
Yeah, and I want to start by saying too that I came into a state which actually had very sophisticated folks and teams built out that do this kind of analysis. I think we have NJKIC, which is our cybersecurity organization in the state, which is fantastic. I think a model that leads the country in many ways. And a lot of what we've done is in partnership with them. They're very hands-on in testing out models as well, issuing guidance, following national briefs on security about things that need to be considered in factoring this in. So hopefully I've contributed something to that, but we also have folks on our team who have spent years researching AI and bring a policy background as well. And that collaboration, right? People who come from the AI policy background, people who understand the human-centered work of delivering services, and then the cybersecurity experts, that's what puts together something like the New Jersey AI acceptable use guidance, which is available for the whole state. And it's also publicly available if it's a model to other states, it's out there. And we try to take the approach of, it's very hard to prohibit technology adoption, especially technology adoption that's radical and potentially very beneficial. But there are also real concerns. So we want to get people tools that we have reviewed and approved to be able to get them moving, along with training and guidelines and appropriate guardrails to make sure that the use cases that they have are thoughtful and measured, right? They understand things like hallucination, potential bias that could be in models based off of training data, all the things we kind of have to think through. So I do think, having been around a bit in this space helps inform the human centricity of the work. But we do that, amongst real kind of partners here in New Jersey that think very deeply about the technology as well.
We at Technique both cover early stage, fast moving startups and institutions like government. So I always feel this tension where I kind of frankly want both sides to inject a little in each other. And I'm not interested in either side thinking they're all right. Because you and I both know I've come across more than one startup founder who's like, why can't government move faster? And I'm like, because they're doing something with greater sensitivity than your food delivery app or whatever. So like, it just is, the stakes are different. Just wondering to hear, how do you balance the higher stakes in and around the work you do with still moving forward, right? Because there is obviously, there's at times a fair criticism that we can lawyer ourselves to death in the United States and we can grind any idea to a halt. And if there's any possible risk of any information being misconstrued on this New Jersey permit drafter tool, I can imagine a world you being entirely shut down. So how did you balance the giving yourself enough room for your team to get something out while reflecting some inherent chance or risk?
I really appreciate this point. I have often felt personally that what I can offer is to understand and have been in that kind of drive of a startup. When I started in that company, it was less than 20 folks. It was a bootstrapped organization, pre-Series A. We went through a Series A. I left and came back from B to C to D. I've seen kind of the early stage and then the rapid high growth over 1.2 billion valuation kind of cycle. And there is a real energy and drive around that. But at the same time, like you say, the government programs are, for many folks, truly existential and important. So I don't come at this work thinking government needs to be like a startup any more than I would think, government operating like a business, something that people have said for decades is, a fully nuanced and thoughtful approach. But I do think if we enter government service with the urgency of we're going to disappear if we don't figure out the model and have product market fit and have the right kind of fundamentals in place, if we bring that energy to making sure people get the benefits that they need and that programs that we put out there work, then I do think we can be, a net positive force. So it's nuanced, it's a balance, but I feel urgency every day, even having done this work now in this role for a couple of years, about not, that we're going to get this system modernized in 5 to 10 years, but that today somebody is going to go onto a website on a government site and try to figure out how to get back on their feet. And that site may or may not help them. And if it doesn't help them, it's making the problem significantly worse. We're losing trust. And it compounds because we have so many challenges in the world generally that we actually need to be better at delivering service, not losing trust where we can already on the basics. So I think about this point, Chris, a lot about how do we have that right balance of injecting energy, injecting novel methods or concepts, but without sort of overcooking the work that needs to get done, because the consequences are significant if we do that.
So we have maybe had like a societal reckoning over the last 20 years from this kind of technology is pure magic, this generation of digital technology, to like got a lot of waves of technology still tools, and they can't solve what isn't addressed otherwise. Something I think about people who work in government or around civic technology, I come across this kind of tension where how technology tools can only cover up a big enough gap. Let's use your permit drafter tool as an example. We obviously know that there are lots of burdensome regulations or licensures that lots of people would say probably would be better off to not have that at all. I get the idea that ultimately technology and government, like, we operate in the world as it is now. We're not changing those regulations or what licenses is available, so we're going to make it as seamless as we can. I just would love to hear you talk a little bit about that tension of confronted with the world. I imagine your job is, how do I make it as seamless as possible for New Jersey residents? But I gotta feel like sometimes you're like, man, it shouldn't. The whole thing is broken. I can't band-aid over it. When are the technologies you're building band-aiding over something that we should be addressing elsewhere versus, no, this is the appropriate role for technology? Do you feel that tension when you look at the responsibilities that sit under you for a state?
Yeah, we have to operate on both timelines, and we've done this in very real ways. If you look at, there's been a lot actually that's been written and covered about New Jersey's approach to modernizing unemployment insurance. Unemployment insurance, like many programs in New Jersey and elsewhere, these are maybe surprisingly still COBOL mainframes that do a lot of the back-end processing. One approach to doing a modernization project is to say we're going to start at replacing the mainframe with a new technology sort of product or system. And then after that's done, we'll then build customer-facing enhancements. In New Jersey, starting years ago, coming out of the pandemic, we took a different approach, which is let's figure out how to deliver value as quickly as possible while setting up a separate effort that is equally dedicated, but working on the longer-term modernization of the core technology system. What that meant, we actually did some partnership with the United States Digital Service, the federal government at the time, the U.S. Department of Labor, led by our New Jersey Department of Labor. And we had a program where we took all the 60 plus different questions that are on the UI form, depending on which path you go down. We presented them to people. This was during the pandemic, so I was virtual, but asked them, here's a question. Do you know what this means? What do you think it means? We created a set of content changes that simplify the language of the presentation of those questions. And we also worked on the presentation of the form, making it mobile responsive, really, frankly, basic things, but that needed to get done. And overall, those changes took it from an average of 4.5 hours, which is a very long time for people to finish the application for unemployment insurance, down to about 40 minutes. Still a long time, but substantially less. That number has continued to decrease to less than 25 minutes now. But if you think about that, that effort, it took a couple months to get the research in order. It took less than a month, a couple weeks to do the development and make the changes. And if we had said we're going to focus on longer term infrastructure technology modernization and didn't do that, I can't count the number of millions of UI applications that have gone through the new system during that time that wouldn't have that benefit. So very likely at some point in the future, all of that work, maybe they're Band-Aids, it's all going to be thrown away. And I think that's also, frankly, fine, because we didn't know if that was going to be a year fix, a 5-year fix, a 10-year fix, but we knew that people needed it. And the Department of Labor in New Jersey didn't just stop with the superficial front end work. They also have an effort, it's been ongoing and substantial, to fix the core systems. But I think you have to do both. Just otherwise, you're going to be subject to changes too that we can't predict, right? New technology now might change our 5-year plan 3 years in, as we've seen over the last couple of years. But I would not lose sight of the things that could be done now. I think that's equally important.
Well said. The unemployment insurance in particular, like famously the place where we've done research around the administrative burden, that sometimes someone wants it to be difficult, which I view from the outside of covering civic technology. I felt like over a generation, I watched a lot of very bright, very earnest, very hardworking civic technologists confront that over the span of their careers. Where like, oh, this is a solvable problem. I know how to build some software. I can just do this. And they confronted, sometimes the system doesn't want it to be easy, and so it's not actually a technology problem whatsoever. So I guess I'm curious, you've been at this a while now. Do you have other parts of your job that we wouldn't think you would be doing as CIO? Meaning culture change, like advocating, understanding, is this blocker blocked for some reason that is not what it says it is? Like, how much of that is part of your work or others who are doing this kind of job? Like, we can do the software, but is software really the problem?
Yeah, maybe most of the work actually goes into culture change, and in a sense, it's trying to reignite the civic mindedness and the possibility within the folks that we work with across the state. This is not just trying to be hyperbolic. I really don't think I've met somebody here who they show up to work every day because they want to make life harder for people. I think over time, maybe you lose a little bit of the kind of idealism that brings one into this kind of work, but it's always there at some level. It tends to be the driving factor for many people. What I think wears them down, or can frankly wear me down too, is you run into so many obstacles. Sometimes they're policy, law, sometimes they're just the sort of physics of really old systems that have been underinvested for decades. And you start to constrain what you think are possible outcomes or solutions. So I think, what I try to do for our team, and hopefully our team tries to do across the state, and we see also, folks in agencies do this too, is not settle for the way things have been. Really just, we have a mission to do. We have to deliver for folks in the state. We have to understand what are the new things that have developed that change the game, and how do we get people to, if something didn't work, that's not a reason to not do it again. It's a data point on how to try to adjust the way that we do it, and we keep moving. And I should say too, since I've been doing this in the last couple of months, in New Jersey, we've had a change of administration with Governor Mike Sherrill coming in. Starting in the transition, these were themes that the governor directly and her core team talked about, wanting to have a team in the cabinet that is focused on getting to yes, delivering results, not losing sight of what the purpose that we have here in government has been. And I felt that. I think many folks on our team have seen the new folks coming in, injecting new energy across the state. So all of those things kind of go together to fight against what might be the trend to say, we've tried it and it hasn't worked, or there are too many problems, we're never going to get to everything. And I really think that ability to meet people where they're at, understand why things are hard, why people might be feeling burnt out within the government, but help ignite the spark of there's something really, truly transformative if we can figure out how to work together to deliver on government's promise. That is equally, and in fact, very often more important than the technology solutions that we build.
I want to touch on gubernatorial transition because it happens everywhere. There's IT leaders, innovation leaders at every level of government that do some version of elected officials changeover, and this gets handled differently, and sometimes it makes sense to me. I over my reporting career, I've always been interested in this tension of what gets called government IT has this two track of it's perceived as the most boring stuff and the flashiest, neatest stuff. Is Microsoft Word updated somewhere in the back room, and are we deploying AI or whatever the right metaphor for? And there is that kind of tension. Talk to me a bit about that going through a gubernatorial transition, and how much this can be seen as, I'm just running the railroads and I'm keeping the railroads running. How has the gubernatorial transition gone and balancing just keeping the railroads going? And oh no, did I lose you? Dave Cole mid-interview. Is this me? Goodness gracious. Oh,
yes,
hey, Dave.
I can hear you again. My apologies.
Yeah.
I could see your video, but couldn't hear your audio coming through there. If you wouldn't mind just repeating your question.
How did the gubernatorial transition go? Folks around the country do some version of that. Saying that I'm on team keeping the railroad going, not any one or another elected official.
Yeah, the transition first and foremost is about making sure that the new team has the information and the access they need to be able to stand up their operation. So, early on, we worked with our agency partners to make sure that everything we had done previously was documented and that there was a good kind of briefing book in place. Then the exciting thing is you get to meet the new folks coming in, hear their vision about what they want to accomplish, and start to figure out how we could fit in. So for us, in New Jersey, Governor Sherrill appointed Kelly Doucette as the chief operating officer, the state's first in this role. And it's a role specifically focused on making sure that our state government is coordinating and collaborating and then delivering results that are measurable. This felt very much like a spiritual fit with a lot of things that we had been trying to do on an agency by agency basis. So having a champion in the governor's office leading that has been transformative as well. And so you can see just through the executive orders that established the COO role and how it focuses on cross-agency metrics and coordination, the saving you time and money agenda. None of these things for us were about necessarily, embracing a political ideology as much as these are practical ways that we can get government to deliver and address some of the systemic challenges about agencies being siloed, data not being shared, too many priorities, not enough focus. So that new sort of injection in philosophy and then building it out with actual implementation, operational power through a role like a COO and a team around her, for us has been really helpful in our work with agencies.
Do I have this right that you guys are not just building internally? There is a business model in which some of the technology you're building is either being sold or leased or shared or what with other agencies. Is that right? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so right now all of our work is generally funded through a state appropriation. We have a federal grant under coronavirus relief efforts that's winding up, and we are very fortunate to be one of the first folks to receive the Public Benefits Infrastructure Fund grants, the PBIF grant, which focuses on more of the AI work that we're doing. But we're not necessarily in a position to sort of monetize or generate revenue. It's not our core mission to do that.
Right.
Under the new structure that we do have the ability to develop a revenue model. And I think where this gets really interesting for us, we're not going to be building things on behalf of other states or governments, like in a custom way. That's not our mission. We focus on New Jersey. But if we develop something like, for instance, our contact center platform, which is being used by over a dozen state agencies, and we talk to another state government about that, as we have, very often they'll say, that sounds really great, but we don't know how to set it up. Can you just help us do it? If we have a cost recovery mechanism for that kind of work, that actually enables us to extend our mandate beyond what we're funded to do currently, right? We could potentially offer some hosted solution or help make modifications to improve that based off feedback from other government agencies. That's all where we'd like to go. I think it's in the spirit of actually being efficient in the truest sense, having sustainable work that we do. But our core mission, is funded centrally by the state. It's focused on the things that we need to build for New Jersey agencies.
That's interesting. I get that that's just a theory, but to linger on that for a sec, how do you weigh as a civic tech guy building business.gov on an open source platform versus selling? I like the framing of cost recovery for time. That's a services model that'd be familiar to lots of open source folks. That'd be familiar, but just maybe talk that out a bit of the civic technology movement that I picture you being kind of part of or coming out of, in the idea of we're going to stack tools that now can be shared and let everyone kind of level up across government agencies versus the pressure to bring in revenue, which is not what folks often associate with government. Talk to me a bit about how you weigh those two.
Yeah, I think we've tried to be very clear with folks within the state government too. And anytime we get asked to talk about this in a larger context, it's critical for the state to develop and invest in its own capacity. That has to, I think, require public funding. It needs to be something that is developed and nurtured over time. A very quick example, we, as I mentioned, built New Jersey AI Assistant, which is an internal secure tool like an AI chatbot. It's based off of commercial models, but it's an application developed internally. It uses an open source package, but the whole thing came together really in a matter of weeks as part of an effort to have a whole of state approach to training the workforce for safe, responsible use of AI. We couldn't do that in weeks if we hadn't spent years building the team, building the relationships with the IT organizations to get to the point where we were ready to go when the moment came. So the central state public funding, it invests in that. It's the ability to respond to the next crisis and to build the infrastructure to make sure that we can avoid crises in the future. So I just think that has to be fundamental. I know some states and federal government and others have gone back and forth on how much should agencies pay for the work. Even within the state context, if an agency is by and large providing the funding, they're probably building towards their priorities. And what we want to do is establish shared efficiencies and priorities across the whole state government, right? Not necessarily have each agency operating in full autonomy. Where it makes sense, we'll prefer autonomy, but there's an opportunity to have the economies of scale coordinating. Being centrally located and centrally funding enables us to do all that. So, the additional revenue potential of the work that we're doing, I think it's highly compatible with being an open first culture. We have, I think, probably about 50 public repos that are available, ranging from small libraries to just projects that maybe they're only useful as an illustration, but we want people to see them. Anything more that we're working on, we try to push to be open. That partnership that I mentioned on unemployment insurance, for instance, with the federal government, that whole entire repository of the whole application is available on GitHub. People in other states could take it and fork it and build on top of it. So we're not necessarily interested in monetizing software in the sense that, we build something, we want to keep it closed and sell it. We want that to be public. If somebody can make use of it or learn from it, that is a successful, outcome in and of itself. But where there's friction around the hosting, the expertise, the kind of support, we're trying to find a way to sustainably be able to do more and scale beyond our kind of work directly in New Jersey without stretching, the limited public resources that we have in the state already.
I'm going to lose you here in a sec. So a couple last points to get to. One, maybe an inevitable one, but you've done the federal government, private sector, state government now. Talk to each other. What's private sector got to know about public sector that it still doesn't understand, and what does public sector got to know about private sector that it still doesn't understand?
I'll give you just my narrow opinion on this. I'm sure lots of folks have had similar kind of experiences and interpret them differently.
Few things Americans like to talk about more than this over focused binary.
I think, and you touched on this with your setup to one of the previous questions, but there is an opportunity to launch things that have critical value and the kind of scale that we see in the tech sector within government right now. And that to me is exciting. I think to a lot of folks on our team, it's been exciting. People come for this work and they stick around because time and again, you get to experience it at the same time. So that's something, if you're coming from the private sector into the public sector, know that opportunity is there and that your skills will be uniquely valuable in unlocking it. At the same time, there are a lot of people who really know their stuff in the government too, right? They might be experts in the details of how a policy needs to be set up so that it can be equitable, which is a really important point, even in this day and age, and so that it can run correctly. They might not know the systems that could enable that or what the latest technology that might solve a problem that they've seen in the past is. So there's a really good kind of connection of those. And then I would say for the folks in the public sector looking to the private sector too, partnership is in fact possible, and some of the most transformative work I think comes from both of the teams coming together. It can be, there's an instinct of the public sector to think the commercial incentives are always going to warp our mission and we have to be a little bit cordoned off in our work. So I would just look for the opportunities to let people in, to share openly about problems and invite solutions. And then, we'll figure out amongst the public sector how to hold the line on true values, right? That will always be the public sector's mission, is to uphold our democratic values, our values of making sure that we treat people equitably and fairly. But you can do that in partnership. And there are many companies and individuals and companies out there who are interested in that kind of work together.
Dave, I'm gonna lose you, but I don't know. Can you flex me some New Jersey cred? Give me a little what'd you grow up loving or doing or visiting or being, or what are you doing now? Give me anything. Give me some Jersey cred. As a guy who also grew up in New Jersey and actually quite adores the state. Flex for me, Dave.
I will tell you, yes, the Garden State is real and alive. Just yesterday, I was invited to tour a tulip farm in central Jersey, about 20 minutes outside of Trenton. Millions of tulips available for people to pick. People have probably seen the pictures online. It's an absolutely beautiful place. They also balance a very interesting technology approach to growing tulips for wholesale that relies on a lot of robotics. They have arms that came from the automotive industry that got decommissioned that are now used for agriculture uses. So it just, to me, was such a great encapsulation of, we are the Garden State. We're also the innovation state. People can go there now. It's tulip season. I highly encourage them to check it out and, come and see us over the summer. Beautiful places to visit.
Love this. I didn't know that. Tulips in Central Jersey. I'll be checking that out. Dave Cole, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
See everyone next time. See ya.